Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Billions at Stake. Insurance data reveals correlation between the SANS 5 critical controls and risk reduction. Our featured speakers today are Robert M. Lee, Tim Conway, and Mark Stacy. If during the webcast you have any questions for the speakers, feel free to enter them in the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording will be available for viewing in the next 48 hours, all of which can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I will kick us off with just brief intros, and then I'll turn it over to Rob and to Mark. My name is Tim Conway. I'm with the SANS Institute, the Industrial Control System Curriculum Lead here, and I get the pleasure of working with all of our instructors and authors across SANS who are all out working throughout many environments and working in the field, either at critical infrastructure, key resource companies, or running their own company and working for all those various organizations throughout the world. I also have the pleasure of doing similar tasks, and of reference or importance for this webinar, prior to coming to SANS, I worked for an asset owner and operator for about 16 years in the energy sector. So out of electric generation, transmission, distribution, and control center, as well as the company was involved in natural gas pipeline and distribution across 14 states in North America. So kind of encountered the various standards and cyber insurance providers throughout my career there, and have continued to do so after I've left that organization over the last 13 years doing work with different providers and companies. With that, I'll turn it over to Rob and then to Mark.
Hey folks, yeah, I'm Rob Lee. I'm the CEO of Dragos and founder of Dragos. I also am a SANS SANS fellow, doing SANS ICS 515, SANS ICS 310, and also am involved in an author of Forensics 578, which is the cyber threat intelligence course. Outside of SANS, started my career in the U.S. military. Started in the Air Force side of the house, spent most of my time with the National Security Agency, building out the U.S. government's mission, looking at states, breaking into infrastructure. I have since returned to service. A lieutenant colonel down in the Army Guard, where I lead up the OT response plans and try to develop those for the country outside my role at Dragos. And then also sit over the World Economic Forum, looking at international policy as it relates to critical infrastructure, especially in the energy sector between electric and oil and gas. And it's been really cool to bring this report to folks. I'll highlight, I know Mark and Tim are going to hit on this as well past the intros, but this report was generated from Marsh and their data sets. Marsh, as we'll get into, is the largest broker in insurance community by far. And so while it's really cool to bring this to the SANS audience, this whole approach is really us speaking to cybersecurity people about what the insurance community is doing. This is not for us to try to speak to the insurance community. They're doing their own thing. And this report is a huge milestone for them. This is really us breaking it down to those of you that deal with this on a day-to-day basis, especially CISOs or senior directors of security. They're reporting into executives, reporting to boards, trying to think about how to manage risk. This is a very unique and very important contribution to that whole insurance discussion. And I believe it will be very critical in driving forth cybersecurity and OT and the internet sort of interconnection between OT. But with that, Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Rob. Mark Stacy. I started my career doing digital forensics for the Department of Energy Counter Intel, and then moved outside of the government sector 15 years ago now, and currently work as the head of our risk and resilience solutions team at Dragos. And we are really focused on those partnerships outside, externally facing, if it's law firms or insurance underwriters, brokers, advisory firms, really focused on that risk and resiliency in OT space.
Awesome. All right, so as we run through this, we will generally talk a little bit about sort of two parts of this world, coming from an asset owner and operator perspective, looking at kind of the risks that we face daily and sort of cyber physical mix. If you're working for a utility, you're facing risks constantly of storms, of damage, of equipment failure, misconfigurations, potential human loss of life, or not providing a essential service to your customers, and what you do to manage those risks. And I'll say over the last 2.5 decades, we've started to have cyber as more and more a part of that conversation. as how we operate these systems is all through digital assets. So depending on which sector you're coming from, whether it's nuclear or electric or natural gas or water, rail, you start to see various things happening throughout the community over the last couple of decades of how can we ensure we're doing a good utility practice, a common term of reference that the way we are securing and managing and delivering our service, similar to peers in the same space, we started to create sort of good utility practice guidelines of what we were doing to operate our systems and started to include cyber. As time has passed, some of those things became more than just guidelines. They became standards, they became regulatory, and we started to see some industries shift because of sort of the standards and frameworks. And there's no shortage of what those things are, meaning kind of across these standards and frameworks, you will hear things like IEC 62443, you'll see NIST 800-82, you'll see ISO 27001 for some parts of the IT-focused infrastructure. Some sectors uniquely have regulatory guidance and guidelines like the bulk power sector out of North America with NERC, or nuclear with NRC and the associated NEI 0809. And then you start to get into what's happening overseas with NIST and NIST2. And you see all of these things sort of moving where it's not just here's a guideline that you should go talk about during procurement, but here's an actual regulation of what you're going to go and do. And as asset owners, we've seen across certain sectors this move into a regulatory environment, and then we've seen the outcome of that, meaning leadership understands it and they have to go pursue. And we've sort of waited for, okay, so we've seen that in 2 sectors in the United States. When are the other 14 going to get their regulation? And when is that going to occur? And what do we do in the meantime? A lot have sort of looked to what are the frameworks? What do we do in the meantime? And others have sort of popped up and said, we're also getting questions when we bring in our insurance providers, and we're starting to ask for cyber insurance, and they're looking for what controls or what frameworks or what things we put into place. So you have this common conversation in 2 different groups and 2 different communities. The one that we're going to talk about first with the 5 controls is if you already have a regulatory body and framework like NERC, that's obviously what you're going to be doing, but specifically for those NERC affected assets. Meaning, if you're a large vertically integrated utility, you could say, sure, we're doing NERC, but you are doing it where you have to. And then you have all of your distribution substations and all of your non-NERC assets where you have the same question as everybody else of what are we doing at those sites to reduce risk and include cyber in those conversations. As these things have come to sectors and come to industry, the areas where you know what you have to do, whether it's in NRC or whether it's in bulk power, you're clearly taking those steps or in pipeline with the security directives. But for all of the other areas, whether it's distribution, whether it's rail, whether it's aviation, you don't necessarily have those direct, specific regulatory cyber elements of what to go and follow. As Rob and I have worked with a number of organizations in the US and abroad, and they've asked, what should we be doing to manage our risk? They also point to other things that exist from a, should we measure kind of where we're at? And this started long ago with the ESC2M2, the electric sector cybersecurity capability and maturity model, where it was a host of 342 questions, and we'd start to go through to determine through a self-assessment of kind of where we stood as an organization. And then that would generate this kind of beautiful report that in one view, leadership could look at it and say, these areas that are red, what are we doing about them? These various controls and these various things that we should be investing in. And that's absolutely what they'd focus on. And when you'd go and look and say, well, for those items in red, that is a collection of 19 or 20 different things that we need to go build programs around. Or we could look at kind of the CISA created performance goals, the CPGs that have been released, and sort of managing and measuring to outcomes. You could also just sit and wait in some sectors for your audit to come in. Kind of the auditors reviewing all of the controls and all of the things that you're doing and sort of determining, do you meet strict compliance with the requirements in those regulatory areas? So across the standards and frameworks and guidance and direction, there's piles and piles and piles of things that you could be doing. Across the, we're going to go do a self-assessment, we're going to look at performance goals, and we're going to see our outcomes in the sectors that are audited, or even an internal audit for sectors that aren't regulated, and determine what we feel we're missing. You have two approaches that you can kind of get a view of your environment, but ultimately when you get up to leadership, the conversation ends up being very, very similar across every sector globally, and it's just tell us what we need to do, because we could spend unlimited amounts of money in trying to cyber our environments and all of our critical assets and all of our critical resources. And from an asset owner perspective, I'd find myself in meetings and rooms talking about how we want to upgrade controls and how we want to do certain things at a substation, for example. And sitting next to me was a substation engineer saying the transformer at that substation is 63 years old. So why would we spend $2 million in cyber securing the environment when the asset itself could fail at any moment, and we can't justify that? So how are we justifying and measuring risk across these environments? Isn't there anything we could be looking at as far as what the adversaries are doing and sort of threat-informed approaches? And that's really where Rob and I sat down and thought this through from the perspective of what we've seen in incident response, in attacks and case studies that have occurred around the world that we've had the opportunity to be involved in or do analysis of. And we took that from a threat-informed perspective and really tried to create this really, really focused list of here's the 5 controls that we would prioritize and look at and highly recommend for organizations and critical infrastructure to start pursuing. Rob, you want to jump in on this slide?
Yeah, and I think, this is where, for those of you that are around the cybersecurity community for a while, but especially SANS, there was the SANS 20 critical controls for years. And where the security community used that to some reasonable effect, it was very effective at boards and executive staff to be able to talk about what we were doing as a community, especially outside of jargon. And as you'd imagine, most executives and most boards are in the position of, how do I not underspend, but not overspend against the risk? And the 20 critical controls were really helpful at that. Over time, SANS sort of pushed those to the Center for Internet Security and said, why don't you manage these? It's so successful, we don't necessarily even want it like bound to organization. Let's create a nonprofit sort of around it to do that. And for years, CIS had asked Tim and I, and SANS had asked Tim and I, like, what are those for OT? Because we recognize that while many of the principles in those 20 critical controls are valid, it's not tailored for OT. It really is enterprise IT focused. And so we've been asked for years and years and years. And honestly, I think we both kind of shied away from it a bit. And I'd been asked for years and years and years by our students at SANS. I get it. I believe you. I bought in. I drank the Kool-Aid. Tell me what the answer is. And for years and years and years, Tim and I shied away from that. And largely the reason for that was probably numerous, but big 2 for me. Number 1, when we say OT, it can represent so much. We're talking about a distribution substation. Are we talking about the onboard ship systems of a cruise line? Or talking about satellite and space-based systems? Are we talking pharmaceutical? Like, what are we talking about? It's just OT, because OT is all the systems, to include Windows operating systems and otherwise, that relate to control loops and physical processes, right? Digital networked physics. And so we tried not to have too specifics when the world of OT itself isn't all that specific. And especially as educators, we're a big fan of, look, just because we think it's the right idea doesn't mean it has to be the right idea. We just want to give you the tools to be able to go make a good decision that you can stand behind. After years and years and years of folks asking, and now having the data sets of real threats and what they're doing, we decided to come up with an answer. Because and I think that last point is really key. Prior to 2015, a lot of the standards and frameworks that Tim referenced in the previous slide had been created. They've been updated since then, but a lot of the methodology that went into creating them were formed prior to 2015. The first time that we really started to see numerous ICS or OT cyber attacks was 2015 and on. So a lot of the most rich data sets of what were threats actually doing happened post creation of a lot of the standards and frameworks that we use. And again, that's not to put down the framework standards. I think they have plenty of value. And the honest answer is go pick something and do something, and you're going to be doing a good job. But now that we had a lot of insights and threat-informed views of what the threats were actually doing, and there's a lot of demand of help me come up with a strategy. not the prescriptive controls. We'll use NERC if we want to. We'll use NIST if we want to. We'll use 62443 if we want to. We'll use those as the lexicon, the Rosetta Stone to which we communicate. But what's the strategy behind it? Like, what are we trying to accomplish and why? That's when we sat down and do the 5 critical controls. And so the methodology for us, for those of you that haven't been introduced to it before, was we looked at every single industrial control systems attack that we'd been part of, as well as all the known data sets publicly. So a lot of private data sets and a lot of public data sets. And we looked at it from the basis of what controls were effective in all of the attacks, not 10%, not 50%, not a one-off, not research coming out of DEF CON, not some university thought one time you could spin a turbine this way. What actually happened and what was actually effective in every single case. And it turned out to be these 5. And the beautiful thing about the 5 is it is something that is adaptable to your industry, which solves that first challenge we have of OT is different. And so let's take this as an example. We've had plenty of webinars and white papers on the 5 critical controls, so we won't spend like an hour on this, but that first control that talks about an ICS incident response plan, not only is it kind of obvious of you need a plan for your worst day and then reverse engineer your security program towards it, not the other way around. But inside that concept of an ICS incident response plan is the necessity to identify the scenarios that you want to be dealing with, identify the risks. And so it's not meant to say that everybody's going to have the same 5 controls. The implementation of those 5 controls is going to be very different based on industries. Let's take this example. I'm in the electric power industry. I've got a generation transmission sites, and I looked and I see the Trisis or Triton malware come out, the targeted safety instrument systems in a petrochemical facility. And I look at it and I go, I don't have safety systems in my transmission sites. I'm not in the petrochemical industry. There's probably lessons learned that I could have from that attack, the tactics and techniques of the adversary, the methodology. Like I can learn something from it. But is that really the right place to start? If I have a limited set of resources, am I trying to limit attacks on safety instrumented systems that I don't have in an industry that I don't exist in? Or should I look to the attacks in Ukraine 2015 for the distribution sites, the Ukraine 2016 attacks for the transmission sites, Pipe Dream for the ability to impact a variety of operations, and ransomware that happens to hit OT all over the place? Well, I'd say you probably ought to start with the things that have actually happened in your industry. And if I get up to a board of directors and executive staff, or even my operations staff, and say, "Hey, there was this cool research, and I gotta go reduce the risk against something that has never happened at all," they're gonna say, "Thanks for playing, but I got that 60-year-old substation equipment I got to restore, and cyber's not my only risk." If I come to them and go, "Something happened in oil and gas," they might go, "Okay, that's interesting." But if I say, "This has happened in our industry to our peers, and we know start to finish what it looks like, we need to determine, do we accept this risk or not? And if you say we don't accept the risk and we need to mitigate it, then I can come back to you with a plan based on these 5 critical controls that represents the minimums, not overspending, but not underspending either, of exactly what we need to do to deal with that risk." That's where the 5 critical controls really is been very successful. And so Tim and I have seen this used at a lot of different organizations since we published it, briefed out to boards, governments. There's a variety of governments out there that are using this as far as the regulatory framework these days. It's a adaptable strategy, not a checklist of controls, that looks at what's the risk in your organization based on what has actually happened to other organizations. And here's a roadmap of how to approach it. Good example, defensible architecture. What is a defensible architecture? Well, if I care about ransomware in OT, I would note that a significant portion of the ransomware that gets into OT hits IT networks and then moves through shared services like Active Directory into OT. So it's not about, I don't want to connect up to Active Directory. Whether you want to or not is irrelevant. It is, we have examples where the connection of Active Directory between IT and OT has led to material risk inside of organizations as it relates to the scenario you just picked of ransomware. Therefore, an appropriate security control would be to break the Active Directory between IT and OT. So it allows you to adapt the entire security program based on the actual risk that you and your industry face. This, and as we'll get into the couple slides coming forward in the insurance discussion, this set forth an understanding of what does right sizing security controls to risk looks like, which is really where the insurance community is like, okay, I got it. This I can deal with. You go to an insurer, and the same, you go to a board and say, there's a man-in-the-middle attack that they released at Black Hat, and it's super interesting. They go, cool, that's great. I don't care. But if you're able to say, here's something that's happened to us or our peers. Here are the controls of which we can adapt to actually mitigate just that risk. And there's data behind it, and not just Rob Lee or Tim Conway or Mark Stacey feels it's a good control or not, but there's data behind it. Now you have something that you can start to build patterns around. You can start to understand the data around. You can start to say, here's where it was effective and where it wasn't. Here's the amount of risk reduction you can get to. And I think that's, again, not to give too much away, but as we get into slides, that's what turns this into something the insurance community cares about. It's not what standards body or what expert thought good look like. It's what does the data show in terms of something that's actually effective in reducing risk. Then we can put data, then we can put actuarial data, then we can assign numbers to it. And the numbers are debatable. Any model, any math, any numbers you ever put in, people are going to take shots at. But when you can get to, here's a methodology that's defensible and a directionality of what this means, now you can assign dollars and cents to it in a way that means something outside of the security community. And therefore, this report, this approach, the strategy behind the controls ends up then being useful. But anyways, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, to Rob's point, I mean, if you look at sort of the life cycle and where this 20 critical controls from SANS have gone over to CIS, the 18 critical controls, some come, some leave, they change the ordality. It's something that's a living thing. I think these 5 will absolutely be a living thing as well. It's just we're going to have much longer lives, just like the ICS community. So we would love to have secure remote access solved, meaning at an IT level, having MFA and having vendor and OEM direct connections and all of that stuff done in a way that is managed and works in ICS and OT across multi-state field environments. That problem solved, and we can sort of think about, does this become the 4 critical controls, or do we add a new 5th? But I think we're going to be looking at continued events that occur and continued attacks that involve remote access in this space. So for some period of time, I believe these are the 5, and this is what the 5 is going to be. But looking at the 18 critical controls as an example, that is something that countries have taken from an IT perspective, like Australia, and said, of these 18, we're going to make these the top 4, and that's what we're going to go focus on. And that's really one of the reasons that I think I've seen from an organizational perspective where these 5 have been successful. So the practitioners that are going to do this technical work, they look to their leaders, and their leadership has sort of their areas that they feed into this, from which sites are we going to go do these at first from an identification. So they're tying that to business impact. They're tying it to importance based on the products they provide or the solutions or the services they provide to their company or customers, and really identification of the sites, alignment on risk and the threat scenario. So everything Rob just talked about what are we seeing in this space from our peers and from industry, and what types of things are we trying to prepare against? Prioritizing those with your overall plan. So how much time, effort, energy are you going to go invest in maybe a site that is going to retire in a year or 2, or a product line that's going to retire out in a year or 2? The staffing levels and sort of the workforce behind, where are you bringing people up and what skills do they need to have based on the tasks that they're performing? And then in this space, there is this absolute sort of partnership and marriage that exists between the asset owner and operator and the original equipment manufacturers and the vendors and the system integrators. Nobody stands alone in this space. So identifying what are the risks, what are the 5 controls that we're going to go implement, and to what degree do we need that partner in this marriage to be along with us in either product enhancements, new capabilities, how they provide their services to us. All of those things come together from a leadership level. But again, in an organization, practitioners looking at the 18 critical controls, or looking across IEC 62443, or looking at NIST or CSF and saying we have to do these hundreds of implementation, and sort of taking that stack up to leaders. Leadership will immediately get down to the what do we have to do and what should we do? And that's truly where this conversation in the 5 controls works very, very well. It becomes, in a lot of different sectors, it becomes programmatic of, here's the 5 things we're going to have programs on in the next 2 to 5 years. And here's what the funding levels are going to be in these programs. And here's how we're going to manage success to get there. And that is a very common way you'll see utilities operate from a programmatic perspective. How are we going to do system upgrades? How are we going to do field service upgrades? And these programs that have multi-year across and where you can bucketize them into a programmatic approach as you work through rate cases and as you work through different investment. It's a commonly understood way and dialogue in leadership. This actionable approach becomes accessible without getting into the deep technical, here's how we're going to do defensible architectures, and here's how we're going to go do secure remote access or ICS OT visibility or vulnerability, risk-based vulnerability management. This becomes very leadership accessible in going down the path of here's the program, here's the spend, here's the outcome. And this prioritized order, meaning if you're a smaller organization, just starting with the incident response approach and doing tabletop exercises could be extremely low cost, but have enormous benefit if an event were to occur. And being able to say, this isn't just us doing this, this is threat informed. They could be tied and mapped back to other standards and frameworks. So everything that's in the critical controls, you could say, this is also supported in this framework. It's also supported in the standard, but we're not doing the entirety of those frameworks and standards. We're doing these things that matter for us. With that, we're going to pivot to sort of the other discussion where we've seen entities kind of sitting in a space and saying, we're going to wait until we get guidance on regulation. Or we're going to wait until we get guidance from our insurance providers that say, if you want this coverage, if you want to manage risk and you have your options of avoiding it, mitigating it, transferring it, accepting it, often that's where you'll move to the insurance community. And we've seen that mature greatly over time, where they're not just coming in and providing a cost for a level of coverage. They have a series of questions. They have kind of an approach to look through that feels a lot like an audit now of what are you doing to manage and to sort of accept or transfer to other third party. How are you dealing with these cyber risks that exist in an industry and a sector that the impact could be very, very large if you don't do it correctly? And we don't necessarily want to be part of those claims if you're not doing what you should be doing. So those kinds of questions and that kind of feedback is getting in front of what we've been waiting for regulations for all these other sectors. So you have these two things, and for some entities, you have both. And really kind of moving from what we've talked about, where we've tried to help with the 5 controls, and now into what can be done from an insurance perspective. And I think, Mark, if you want to unmute and sort of walk through this, and Rob, I know you definitely have some thoughts on this report as well. So take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So at Dragos, we have positioned the 5 critical controls for a number of years. And I think we do that specifically because we have seen them work. We have seen the success in our customers, and we've seen the return on investment from their efforts into the 5 critical controls being applied and being effective. And it was about 2 years ago, we were looking for an expansive view of OT risk and really that risk reduction that Rob and Tim mentioned. We're not looking to validate the existence of any one thing. We're not looking to create an echo chamber. Instead, we're looking to get kind of ground-based, ground truth, data-backed numbers that we could really share with the community. Not conjecture, not hyperbole, really looking to avoid bias. And so when we talk about risk, ultimately the insurance industry owns that. They are the only industry that bet their own financials on their customer security posture. As Tim mentioned, they accept risk for their customers. And that's exactly what insurance is. It is transferred risk, a strategic financial mitigation for when that risk is realized. And there are several influences into that. There's likelihood and impact, and we talk about coverage, terms and conditions, and rates. Because they're betting their own financials, the industry moves slowly. They don't base it on opinion. They're not as aggressive with go-to-market approaches. They base it on historical metrics. Anyone with a teenager can understand this. Generally, teenagers have higher premiums for automobile insurance. That's not because your teenage son is more likely to record himself doing something foolish and post it on Instagram for the world to see. It's because, given that specific instance, when they are behind the wheel of a car, they are more likely to be involved in an automobile accident that will have financial or other repercussions. So it's that unique context, again, not based on biases or opinion, but based on decades of data that they've gathered and analyzed. It's a very financial business decision. The leader in the insurance space is undisputably Marsh. They are the largest broker in the world, and brokers play a key part. Brokers sit between the end customers, those that are transferring the risk, and the underwriter or carrier, those that accept the risk. They negotiate policy, coverage, terms, conditions. If an underwriter wants reinsurance, they work through a broker. Because brokers sit in this space, they are trusted advisors regarding risk and managing risk. They bring that historical experience from previous claims and others that helps inform what risk reduction and what risk they're actually being transferred is. And so again, not an opinion. And even if we look at those large companies that are self-insured, they work with brokers as well. Even though they may not buy insurance on the open market, they still leverage brokers' expertise because they're bringing that experience and that historical context forward. So when we first talked to Marsh about doing this report, Marsh was interested. Because again, it is the first of its kind. There's no data set that they just go pull and create numbers on. It required a level of analysis and effort that has never been done before. We're looking at property and cyber policies. So there are potentially different exclusions. They are reported differently. Insurability forms are very different. And so the data is not logically organized anywhere in the world. We work specifically with Marsh's Cyber Risk Intelligence Center over the course of well over a year to gather data, to challenge the data, to reevaluate it until we had something that we can move forward with confidence on. So when we talk about what data was included, Marsh, again, largest claims database in the world. They have a number of subsidiaries. One of those, Guy Carpenter, focused on insurance. And they pulled the claims information from all of those databases. They pulled third-party independent data, insurability reports, pre-insurability reports, breach recovery reports, breach response notices, compiled all of this together to create, it's kind of this iceberg on the bottom right of the screen here. And the different categories of data, the first, and it is really the tip of the iceberg, and those are reported OT cyber incidents. When I say reported in this case, it means an insurance claim was filed. Oftentimes, or we can summarize that as a BI claim, a business interruption claim. So in this case, the company was insured. An important distinction, we're talking about insured, not insurable, and they are two very different categories. But insured, they had an OT incident. They saw it affect their OT process, and they filed a business interruption claim. So very tip of the spear, it is the known. We also have other cyber events, maybe those that were not reported, and that could be for any number of events or any number of reasons. It could be that the impact was minor. They produce, let's say food and bev, they produce a batch, something malfunctioned on the cyber process. Great, it is a business decision to throw out that batch, but we're not going to file an insurance claim. It's still a cyber incident, but no claim is filed. Could also be that they didn't know whether or not it was cyber. And by that, I mean maliciously motivated. Some malfunction on the manufacturing floor or with some computing device. We don't know if it was an adversary or not. We're not going to investigate it. And so they just report it and move on. And then finally, we have general cyber events. And this could be something similar. It was a computer malfunction. We're not sure what happened. There was some impact, but a BI claim is not necessarily filed. So from all of this, again, we're overlapping cyber and property. The databases are very different. The data captured is very different. Marsh went through this over several months until we had a data set that we had confidence in. And again, Marsh is the best suited to do this. They are the trusted industry experts, and they do this for industries across the world. Uh, and so where this was new, it is innovative. OT is again that blend. Working closely with Marsh to do this, we now had confidence to write this report. Now, importantly, in this, category events are not included. And category events are those total impact. So if I have 5 different manufacturing sites or 5 different electric distribution sites, and one of them is impacted, that is what we call a direct loss. It is unique, it is specific to that system. If all 5 sites are taken down and it's catastrophic, oftentimes that will be considered a category event. Some people consider NotPetya category event. Times of war are considered category events because, again, it is a total loss, catastrophic. Those are not included in this data set. And so anything where you throw it out the window and throw your hands up, that isn't what the report is based on. The report is based on really those tangible effects that we may see given day to day or over the course of the next year. And again, this reporting is evolving. As Rob and Tim both mentioned, there is an evolution taking place. We see federal regulations changing, reporting requirements for 8K, as well as business decisions on whether or not things should be reported, whether or not insurance is justifiable for property or cyber. And so as we see the evolutions change, or the US Treasury Department talking about a cyber backstop for insurance, we're starting to gather more information, but this report hopefully level sets and gives us a starting point to start digging in.
Yeah, if I could add, again, I'll highlight a couple of things that really just reinforce what Mark stated. But number one, it's a Dragos report. It's not our work, right? It's very much Marsh's work, to Mark's point, and when we commissioned the report. But what we did do is, by far, we have the largest set of insights into ICS incidents and intrusions. Even though we're a technology company that monitors these networks and so forth, our managed services sees more than others globally, and our incident response team sees more. And so we were able to contribute a lot of the data to them from that set of data, but the preponderance of data that came outside of that, to Mark's point. And I just want to map this to some of what you've heard me say before, for those of you that have been in my class or seen me speak. There's a couple of themes that came out that I thought were interesting, and a couple of things to draw your attention to. Number one, when we talk about OT cyber events, there's a lot of organizations out there that will say we had an IT event, we had an IT incident. And you look at it and go, but your production's down. And they go, no, it's an IT incident. You go, why are you calling it an IT incident? And the consultant or security firm or themselves came into that environment and went, oh, it's a Windows operating system, it's IT. It's like, no, that was a human machine interface or an engineering workstation, that's OT. And it's a lexicon issue. So there are a lot of companies out there reporting IT only incidents that are actually having OT incidents. And where the Marsh data was really useful for that is they looked at people that were claiming to have IT only incidents, but then filed insurance claims about having to take down the production and having business impact on the operations side of the house. And they went, this may be a lexicon issue. The other thing that Mark hit on that I want to foot stomp is that whole discussion of root cause analysis many of you hear me talking about often. There's a significant number of incidents that happen in the community, events that happen in the community, where operations is impacted or the adversary is there and the community doesn't know. A lot of these times we hear about a cyber incidents that are 365 plus days in the making before somebody notices something. And there's many more that are well beyond that. But a lot of times something will take place. There wasn't the appropriate tooling and insights and data deployed ahead of the incident. And so getting to root cause analysis of what actually happened in a complex automated environment is too difficult. And people go, I don't know, gremlins in the system, maintenance issues, et cetera. And so what I thought was so interesting about the Marsh data sets is they ran numerous models applying those different types of assumptions against their data, which is the largest in the world, of when did somebody claim it was IT only, but it impacted operations anyways? when did somebody not claim anything, but they were filing these claims that were abnormal statistically to their peers. Like they looked at it from so many different angles, and I thought it was awesome. And I'll highlight, like, as much as I want the cybersecurity community to dig into this, I'm already ready for like the cybersecurity pundit, and I hate to call this out, but I'm sure there's going to be somebody that comes out, well, actually, I think, and it's like it's irrelevant. It's like if I go to the F1 sporting event and I'm like, here's how I think the race cars actually work, as somebody that has nothing to do with auto and nothing to do with cars, the F1 community is going to look at me and go, thanks, that's adorable. In the same way, the insurance community is looking at this and this data set going, this is really important. Whatever the cybersecurity community says about this is going to be yeah, that's adorable. We're talking. And so again, I'll highlight as we go through this, this is our attempt to explain it to the cybersecurity community, but the insurance community is moving quickly and moving with the confidence and the efficacy of this data set and these analyses that have never been done before. And it's just really cool to see. And I think it's going to be extremely impactful as it gets into chief risk officers, chief financial officers, outside legal firms, outside insurance firms coming into the boardroom. And you as a security staff, especially if you're a CISO or otherwise, need to know that this conversation is happening and where this data is coming from. So I think we've briefed the data thoroughly. So let's go ahead and like jump into the actual findings in the report there. Go ahead.
Thanks, Rob. So just a few quick summations from the report. The first is when we talk about, to Rob's point, what is the at risk over the next year based on this data set? And there's nuance to the data. Again, minimal reporting. Our ultimate goal was that we understand the data set is not complete because it has not been aggregated appropriately. But let's go through a level of due diligence. If anything, we know that these numbers are not overestimates. It's based on the information available. And based on that, we had really that there were billions at risk. And this is based on the previous 10 years of data, again, focusing on that decade measurement and looking over the next 12 months. So the mean on the right side was 31.1 billion at risk for OT cyber over the next 12 months. And again, to the other points, we could say, well, that number we think is high or we think that number is low. Going back to my analogy, I understand that your teenage child is a studious driver. That's great. Doesn't mean anything to insurance. This is unbiased data. And so based on that, we showed 31.1 billion at risk over the next 12 months based on the reporting. Of that 31.1, 12.7 billion is at risk of being involved in an insurance claim. And the distinction there, again, we're looking at the BI claim or business interruption. So this is where the report is really useful for those insurance providers in that insurance industry, because that 12.7 is where that risk was realized. It's where that risk was transferred. And now the insurance industry is being brought in for that financial mitigation. And as with most risk scenarios, we put this into a tail model to look at 1 in 100, 1 in 250, 1 in 500. And we see that rapid growth up to the hundreds of billions of dollars. So when we look at, as Rob mentioned, the models and how Marsh went about it, again, emphasizing one more time, Dragos and SANS, we don't even have access to the data set. We did not perform the analysis. We worked with Marsh through this, but as the independent body, they took these various inputs. They created for individual industries, for individual regions, a specific model based on the parameters. And then for each new region or situation, they would work through the model tens of thousands of times to get an average statistic that we report in the document. So I don't want to go into the details too much here. We'll bring it back to the 5 critical controls, but certainly understand in the report you can look at specific industries and gain a little more context there. Looking at really what the next logical step was, we acknowledge the risk, we acknowledge it from a global level based on the information, but what can we do about it? And for this, the Marsh team went through, again, that massive data set, the insurability reports, breach responses, claims, and mapped what the customers were doing, either in preparedness or defensive actions, to the 5 critical controls. And we use the 5 critical controls again because they are the industry standard. We have seen them be successful. And after mapping those and working through the tens of thousands of iterations and models to try to figure out what works and what doesn't, we get this graph. And I'll be open here that we were, I would say or I'll use the word hopeful. You communicate something, you believe in it, but when you have a tangible data set and do the analysis, you want to see that validation. We were not surprised, but happy to see that the 5 critical controls each mapped to measurable risk reduction and fairly consistently with the order. So an incident response plan. We now have, and this is why the report is so influential, we have an independent data set, independent analysis to validate that if you work towards an incident response plan, and that isn't just the document, it means you're preparing, you've communicated that, you've tested it, there is a measurable risk reduction of around 18.5% to your risk. Again, from the insurance industry that bets their own financials on this, we now have confidence saying, if I can do one thing in the next 12 months, where should I focus? What should I prioritize? Well, the greatest return on investment we could do is focus on that incident response plan. Importantly, across all 5, they are not purely additive. If I comprehensively do all 5 critical controls, I can't necessarily say that my risk will drop by, say, 78%. There is some overlap, maybe between a defensible architecture and network visibility and monitoring. And we, again, run into that data nuance issue where the information collected in a breach report will be different for cyber versus physical. But independently, each control has measurable returns. I think as we look down on the lower half of the slide, another key finding was the direct versus indirect cost. And for this, when we talk about direct versus indirect, direct is generally localized to, again, not all of your sites, but maybe one site. Direct costs can generally be bound by predictable impact. If this transformer goes down, if we take this rail line down, what is the cost to our organization? Those are generally thought of as direct costs. These can also be forecasted, they can be planned, we can budget around them. It's the indirect cost that is more substantial. These are the unforeseen, the supply chain that we don't fully understand, the cascading effects that we may not understand. And this also applies to abundance of caution shutdowns. As Rob mentioned, one of the key findings was a shutdown of the process because they weren't sure whether or not A, it was malicious, or B, it was even cyber, or C, if it could impact the OT system. The inability to answer that question can be incredibly costly. The ratio that came out from Marsh between direct and indirect was 30 to 70 or 25 to 75, which means for any given incident, on average, 30% of the cost is direct. 30% could be considered localized, it could be forecasted, planned for, but 70 to 75% of the cost involving an OT incident is indirect. It maybe is unknown. It has cascading effects that go on for extended period or open years, and that is really where the cost of the incident is. I think the best way to sum this up, and from my experience working with the insurance industry, it said another way is pre versus post breach. Pre-breach, we can plan. We can forecast if this system or this process is brought down, what is the financial impact? And then we can budget and plan for protections and mitigations around that. Post-breach is often viewed as a blank check. If the system is brought down, can we return to service? Do we run into potential betterment issues? Because, as Tim mentioned, the transformer is 63 years old and we can't just return to service, we have to upgrade. how long would it take to get the equipment in there? And is that supply chain something that we can rely on? And so that post breach is not just an open question to asset owners and operators, it is to the insurance industry as well. And so hopefully this report, again, the numbers we have confidence, if anything, they are not overestimates, kind of level sets across the industry and allows us to have more informed decisions, again, based on data that we can back up to ground truth.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Mark. Yeah, I think, and Tim, I'll come to you, but I think the thing that was important for me is while they're not purely additive, the add-on effect of them was something I was hoping to see, right? Being one of the authors of the 5 critical controls, but I was glad to see it. We talk about like an incident response plan. People go, oh, I want an incident response plan. But as Mark alluded to, it's not just having a plan, it's also knowing what data am I going to need to respond to this incident? How am I going to be able to pull that data? What questions I'm going to ask during the incident response, which then immediately leads into defensive architecture, the network visibility, monitoring, the data collection, and so forth. And so I was surprised to see it work out this way. I was hopeful it would, but I was glad it did. The other thing, to Mark's point, that I thought was really interesting is the number of cases where people are proactively taking down their operations sites because their company is compromised, but they don't know whether or not it's compromised in OT or not, which sounds like, oh, IT risk. Except we're doing so little sometimes beyond prevention. We've done a lot in like segmentation and prevention, but beyond prevention, we haven't done a ton in OT writ large. And that means that in the middle of a crisis, executives are not confident because they can't get their questions answered. Is this there? Are we compromised these sites? Would we even know? And so people are inflicting even more cost and risk on themselves by not doing the security controls, and the security controls themselves then also reduce the risk. So you're kind of taking a double hit in that way. And again, I think for the security community listening into this discussion, where I think this is going to be really interesting as a dollar and cents discussion on what do your efforts mean and matter in terms of insuranceability, and also coverages and premiums you can get. And while Drago SANS, nobody besides you and your insurer can talk about coverage and what that actually translates into. I have personally seen at Dragos a number of our customers where their insurance premiums are going through the roof in terms of cyber insurance, 200, 300, 400% increases year over year. And then to be able to show, oh, we're doing things that actually map to defensible data sets and so forth, seeing those drop rapidly, where I saw one global manufacturer roll out a security program aligned with what we're talking about here. And the entire security program paid for itself 3 times over in terms of their insurance drops. And again, that's going to be a case-by-case basis between the insurers. It's not anything that the cybersecurity community can articulate themselves, but it's showing that there's a dollar and cents value here, and that's what's going to get a lot of executives talking. But Tim, any thoughts here before we start moving on?
I think I'll hold them for the next slide, but yes, a number of things just kind of along this discussion point, leading into where this starts to inform and where it guides action. And it's, again, leading into the next slide, but looking across kind of the ordality of the 5 controls, I think Mark's word of we were hopeful. It was very, very, very good. And I think we would have been surprised if there was something that came up as this is one of the number one things, and it wasn't something that is sort of covered in different frameworks or covered in different standards. As you look across the community of effort that contributed to and works on sort of the ISA and the IEC sets of standards, and NERC from a SIP perspective, those are standards that are written by the asset owners knowing they have to go comply with them. So they have intent to go and create those requirements in a way that they're going to be meaningful and that they address actual risk and resiliency. And so to see those bodies that are out there, the standards community and the CPGs and the ESC2M2s for measurement and the NERC SIP standards, those are all being contributed to by a large community of very, very smart people looking at operations and looking at potential impacts and looking at safety. And if something came out of the insurance community that didn't sort of align with that, or if we created the 5 critical controls that didn't consider all of that as well, we would have made a mistake. And I think we would have all been surprised as a cybersecurity community in ICS and OT if the insurance community believed, hey, the number one thing that you should have been doing is zero trust in ICS environments, or You should have been doing identity and access management. That should have been number 2. Like those kinds of things, I think would have shocked or sort of brought the community back and saying, why does the insurance community believe that the number 1 thing we should be doing is intrusion detection systems in OT space or zero trust in OT space? It's good to see that they all align. Again, from perspective of what feels right, it feels right that they're aligned with what the community is doing, whether it's standards, frameworks, or the 5 controls. I don't believe there's any shocks in from the insurance side. But again, I think it coming from that community for that community, the same way we build our standards, Marsh taking this massive data set and going through it and coming and saying, these are the things that matter. That's now going to provide guidance and direction for that insurance community, just like the frameworks and the 5 controls do for the ICS cyber community.
Yeah, one quick note on that, Tim. I think the way that I can best sum it up regarding OT, and as we collectively get better and more informed about it, in this space, customers maybe didn't fully understand what risk they were transferring. But on the other side, the insurance community didn't understand what risk they were accepting. And I don't mean for that to be a bold statement, as I'm not in the insurance community specifically, but that's the feeling that I get. And the primary question being not just we may not understand what risk we are accepting, but we aren't sure how to ascertain what that risk is. The standard questions on MFA and patching don't apply. And so I think that that's where I've seen a lot of good receipt of the report so far, is it does help kind of guide that parent level discussion on how do we ascertain what the risk in this environment is, and kind of dig in, not just that initial question, but the follow-ups. So in IT, that do you have MFA? Yes. That follow-up question is, where is it deployed? So not just that initial stage 1 question for OT, but what are those follow-up questions? And I think so far the receipt from the industry has been very positive. From our insurance partner has been fantastic, because we're starting to get to that level of maturity to have those conversations.
Awesome. You want to lead the way on this final slide, and I'll also reference for attendees the Q&A panel. If you have any questions while Mark is covering down on this slide, Rob and I will probably add some comments, and but we can actively try to answer any questions you have in the Q&A panel if they come through.
Yeah, I think we've mostly covered what's on the slides. Again, across the various industries, if it's insurance, if it's the local owner operator, the CISO, the risk advisor, I think this report is applicable because it takes something as complicated as something as discussed but not well understood or organized as OT cybersecurity risk, and we're starting to logically organize it, and to Rob's point, tie numerics, which allow others to tie dollar values to it, and really kind of elevates that conversation. So I think the comments made so far have covered what's on here.
Awesome. We have approximately 2 minutes left. Rob, do you want to close us out here before we end the session?
Yeah, I would just say, yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out. Mark's probably the best on the insurance discussion as well. But I will note that as we look at our growing and maturing OT security field and what we've done across decades, but really like the last 15 years, has kind of been a golden era of really pushing OT security forward. I'm really excited to see anecdotes turn into actual data, and that is how you mature a profession. Once we can get out of, I heard so-and-so, and there's a database of attacks, and maybe once upon a time this, and into here's the data behind it, here's the case studies, here's the insights, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. That's where you mature a profession. Like having a common language and the data to back up your choices is where we move out of the art of OT security and into the science of OT security, which allows it to be repeatable, allows it to be communicated across the board and executive staff, allows it to be investable and scalable. And we've seen those kind of milestones in the community of a number of different things that have occurred. I think this is another one of those, to be able to have that data. And I'm really excited that Marsh and the insurance community is continuing down that path. I have seen no community misrepresented in OT cyber more than the insurance community? Well, here's why insurers do this. Here's why they don't want to pay. Here's what that, well, did you know there's a active war exclusion? And like, I'm very tired, and I hope this isn't coming off rude to anybody, but I'm very tired of people who are not in the insurance community saying things about the insurance community that's completely just made up. And each one of those last statements as an example is complete trash. And so it's really good to see the insurance community participate in our OT security community, the marriage between the two to turn into real actionable insights and real data. And I think this is another just really good step of maturing our profession and making sure that we continue to scale the defenses for those communities that need them most. With that, I think I'll go ahead and speak for everybody as we're on time to say thanks again for joining. The recordings will be posted, everything will be posted for those that didn't get a chance to attend it live. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Mark or really any of us. But this will be available hopefully as a useful resource to you, and go download the report. So it's out now. Just search the Dragos Marsh OT Cyber report. You'll have access to it, and it's a resource now for you to be able to use, especially in those executive audiences. So thanks everybody, and back over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rob. We will be shutting down the webcast, and again, recorded report available. Search the Dragos site for the OT cybersecurity report, and specifically the Marsh report. Lots of great data in there. Really, really encourage you to go locate it, find it. And of course, the 5 critical controls white paper from Rob and myself on the SANS website. Thanks again, everybody.